On this edition of Independent Sources, net worth. Why hasn't the internet borne the promised fruit for ethnic and immigrant papers, as predicted by many media analysts?
Feeding the profile. Is there an upside to the practice that immediately draws criticism from many minority communities?
And The Doctor Is In. A pioneering immigrant artist gives life to New York City's video art scene. Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Viano Ravinka.
And I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre. It was Mark Twain who famously wrote, "The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated." That quote seems apt to describe the fate of many newspapers still standing, at least ethnic and immigrant newspapers.
For years now, many media analysts have been predicting the demise of the newspaper business. They foretold this fate as long-standing papers like the Rocky Mountain News shut down, and the business giant, the Wall Street Journal, was sold because of flagging share prices.
However, as their mainstream counterparts are making mass exodus to the web, ethnic and immigrant papers aren't as quick to move toward a major migration. What they are discovering is that their readers are remaining faithful to the print product. I spoke with two publishers about why this is happening. Lloyd, 4 years ago, you discontinued the print edition of the KIP Business Report, and you went strictly online. What is the verdict?
For us, it's worked out. There was a hit initially in terms of lost revenue and lost branding and opportunities and other types of things. But as we've made the switch to more online and digital as well as service-based products, then we've started to see a pickup. And unfortunately coincided with the downturn in the economy, but as things are picking up, things are picking up.
Shomik, what is the percentage of revenue that your company, primarily News India Times, get from the internet advertising, and what would happen if tomorrow you decided to do a Lloyd and close out the print editions?
Well, I think as far as the online revenue is concerned compared to the print, I think it's minimal. It doesn't probably get into a percentage also. So if we close the print tomorrow, we are also closed.
It's interesting because 4 years ago, the talk in the industry was that newspaper is dead, online is the future, is the present. You have to do what Lloyd did, close your print edition, go online. But things have changed. It's more nuanced nowadays, isn't it, Lloyd?
Absolutely. What print gives you is branding. That kind of visibility, that kind of visceral visibility in the market where people see you, they see your product and they think of you. And that's something that the pure plays, the pure internet companies, can't match. The other way to kind of get around that is to do like we've done. We've done a lot more events and seminars and workshops and things to kind of, maintain that visibility. But I think when they were talking about this, they were mainly talking about the large dailies and national daily publications, because they have seen a tremendous drop-off in ad pages and readership and everything else. And also those publications that provide broad general information that doesn't speak to anyone. But when you're in a niche market, like with the South Asian communities, Indian community, or the minority business community, that's a niche market. You're providing something that someone's not getting somewhere else. They can't just Google it. Well, they could, I guess.
We can always Google something. Shomik, I wanted to talk to you about, you said the percentage of your revenue online is so insignificant. It's not even a percentage. Why is it so tough to sell internet advertising, web advertising?
Well, because ours is a niche publication group, and the community is primarily looking for a print edition, which they can store, they can keep, they can, and they can read whenever they like. Online, it is also present, but we have seen that somehow people prefer the print version. And the other aspect is, like, if they want to get that information otherwise online, it is practically impossible, because it's very, very personalized, very local, very specific kind of information which appears only in the print edition and also online. So, but people tend to prefer to read the paper.
What about the advertisers, though? Are advertisers asking you, or are you going after advertisers for online businesses? Is there an opportunity there?
There is an opportunity because we are present both in print as well as online. It's a mix of both. We're trying to match both. But the thing is, the advertisers still have faith in the print edition because they know for certain that so many people are getting the newspaper. And it has a different meaning to it rather than a mainstream newspaper, because this is a community newspaper. It rings a bell in the people's hearts, you know. So that way it is different. So the advertisers still have more faith in the print edition than online.
I think you also see, in addition to that, you also see more advertisers are looking to prove their marketing dollars. They want to prove return on investment. So online gives you that ability to be able to show them not just click-throughs, but page views, and a track through, you know, their website, and, you know, forms filled out and emails signed up for and coupons redeemed. You know, so I think that increasingly, particularly if your demographic is, you know, under 40, under 35, you're going to see more and more people not only doing online, but you're going to see more and more doing mobile, because the growth in smartphone penetration in the U.S. is almost at 50%.
Particularly among immigrants and people of color in the inner cities.
Mm-hmm. Blacks and Hispanics are accessing the internet more over the smartphone than over a desktop, you know, computer. So it's really, it's not even the future anymore. This is how things are.
Let's talk about the new business model, because obviously you run an internet-only publication. You no longer are selling button and banner advertising. You have to be sort of like a marketing consultant to your clients. And then you were mentioning how you do fee-based services. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
We help with, because nowadays everyone still wants to do email, so we help with not just design, because anyone can design an email based on a template, but we help create content. So we help to write monthly or weekly email newsletters for people, put information in, then they can, you know, kind of customize themselves a little personal message, help them with coupons. We help professional service firms with putting on seminars or webinars, either online or face-to-face, handling that whole production, marketing, coming up with the strategies for them. Also, in terms of proving your capabilities, we help with some of the collateral that would handle that, some of that being online, and increasingly we're starting to see and starting to move towards video to be able to do testimonials, frequently asked questions, help them update their About Us page, other types of things that help to.
So basically, it's a different business model than we've accustomed to with the newspaper. But you know,
it's more like an ad agency.
Oh, exactly. But speaking of ad agency, Shomek, you are a diaspora type of publication. Are there opportunities through the internet to link, let's News India Times and the other publications that you manage, with a large Indian consumer base in India?
Well, our focus is primarily Indian Americans, Indians living here in the US. So the Indians living in India, that would probably not make sense for us. But what the internet has probably done, helped us do, is probably reach out to areas where we couldn't probably reach out, could have reached out otherwise, you know. Online in remote places where Indians live, they can access the internet and they know that, you know, publication like this exists. So they can download the entire publication from the online version and read it as a subscriber, or else order the print version online and get it by mail.
But what about from a business standpoint? Is there an opportunity, let's say, for a small or mid-sized business in India looking for market share in North America, where, you know, presumably you have a large middle-class consumer?
There is tremendous opportunity. In fact, we have a tremendous amount of number of businesses from India who try to reach out to the NRI population, be it real estate in India, be it entertainment, be it investments, be it so many other things. They all come to the Indian American community over here, and they try to reach out through our publications or through the South Asian media that we have to ask them to invest rather in their businesses, and I think that's a very important share of our revenue.
Last question, Lloyd. Is the death of newspaper, was that premature?
Yes, I think that there's actually been a bounce back because they are able to offer that kind of hybrid between a few articles free per month, and then you kind of come in for the real content. But the key has been you've got to have something of value that people can't get anywhere else. And I think the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal were able to do that, and the Times has done it a little by putting certain pieces of the publication behind a paywall, and they've expanded. It's been successful for them. They're at 400,000 subscribers, so they've now dropped the amount of free articles that you can see. So I think that the death of print, I don't think it's around the corner, but I think that print increasingly is not going to be the driver. It's going to be, in that kind of secondary position. You're going to need, in some cases, you're going to need to have it because of all the intangibles it brings in terms of branding and that kind of visceral touch feel. But increasingly, everyone wants a way to prove the return on their marketing dollars, your advertisers, your sponsors. So you're going to need to expand your online and your mobile presence significantly.
Yeah, mobile, we didn't have time to talk about mobile, but that's just another opportunity out there for small and community media publishers. Lloyd Grant, Shodrick Shomi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Still to come on the show, Profiling the Profiler. We speak with a forensic psychologist about her profession and why profiling is getting a bad rap.
Before that, Abby Shola has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. World Journal reports that Chinese community organizations in the city are worried about Chinese elders after a recent bout of suicides among the group. The Chinese American Planning Council is urging people in the community to monitor the mental health of their elders by talking to them regularly and encouraging them to participate in senior activities. The group is also asking younger members of the community to refer seniors to counseling if their relatives exhibit symptoms of loneliness or abnormal behavior. Cab drivers have joined in the protest against part of the new World Trade Center security proposal, Downtown Express reports. The plan requires that all vehicles that pass through the area be screened at a police checkpoint. Cab drivers say the measure would disrupt their business. At a public hearing, many cabbies said if the measure is approved, they will no longer drive through the downtown area. Residents in the area are also protesting the proposal. From Novogenic, teachers and students at a 50-year-old language and learning school in Manhattan are trying to save the facility from closing down. The board of directors at the International Center is on the verge of shutting its doors for good due to high rent and limited funding to maintain the school. Teachers say the International Center is not only a language school, but a sort of club where immigrants learn about American culture, explore New York City, and other parts of the East Coast. Hundreds of immigrants, including Poles, have learned English there in the school's 50-year history. From Voices of New York, publications covering the Indian community are highlighting the surge in the South Asian and, more specifically, the Indian population in the U.S. News India Times took a look at U.S. Census numbers that revealed an increase in that voting population by 100%. This comes at a time when the South Asian community has grown by 78% over the past decade. Indians represent the majority of that percentage. A second publication, Little India, dug deeper into the census on Indian Americans. They highlighted that Virginia boasts the highest median income among the group, while Indians in New York have the lowest. And finally, the first temporary pop-up restaurant offering kosher food has emerged in Long Island City, Queens. The Jewish Week reports that the owner of Mana Catering, Dan Lenchner, has been serving up a kosher dinner with different themes every 6 weeks since November. Lenchner, who has been a caterer in the neighborhood for over 30 years, says the pop-up allows him more creativity in the way he presents kosher food. Last month's dinner was $100 per person and included Middle Eastern, Asian, and African dishes. The next dinner is scheduled for April 26. Those were just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Gary and Vianora.
Thanks, Abby. The practice of profiling has been prominent in headlines lately. If it's not Police Commissioner Ray Kelly defending officers to City Council members, it's the case of Trayvon Martin, the Florida teenager who was shot by a man claiming that he appeared suspicious.
Profiling is not new. Back in the 1800s, Scotland Yard began analyzing criminals and their behavior to develop a set of characteristics or qualities to identify lawbreakers.
Today, profiling has taken on a racial connotation, and it's coming under fire. Is profiling good science? Does it actually work? I spoke with one profiler who has worked with local and international police to apprehend criminals. Dr. Salfati, thank you for being in studio with us today.
Pleasure, thank you.
Explain the type of information that goes into a profile.
Well, one of the things that we particularly focus on is analyzing what is going on over and beyond the actual forensic, or if you want, biological and chemical information at the crime scene. So rather than focusing on things like DNA and fingerprints and things like that, we focus on the behavioral evidence at the crime scene. So things like the type of victim that the offender might have targeted, if we're looking at a violent crime, the type of weapon, other activities that the offender engaged in at the time of the crime scene, and how they left the crime scene. One of the big things that we focus on is because it's the behavior. Let's say that we didn't have all of the forensic evidence available, or it had been contaminated, or it simply wasn't there because the offender had worn gloves or didn't leave any DNA. They're always going to leave, if you want, a behavioral blueprint, part of the behavior, because even if they did wear gloves, that is evidence that we as behavioral psychologists can actually work with.
So you were talking about psychological variables and also demographic variables. Do they go into the construction of a profile as well? Can you talk about that?
Yes, the main purpose of profiling is not so much to identify the individual person who might be responsible, but the type of person who might be responsible based on the general trends that we find at the crime scene. And so what we try to do is link the behaviors that they engage in with the type of person that they are. Now, because this is being used very much in profiling for the investigation, what is really important to focus on are things that investigators can ultimately use to then prioritize the, if you want, subgroup of suspects that they might want to focus on. So it's things like gender, age, how far away from the crime scene that they might live, if they have any previous criminal record, anything that you might be able to use, rather than psychological aspects that are internal to the offender, which are much more difficult to discern from behavior. You would really need to interview an offender to get to those kinds of things.
And who writes these profiles? Are they experts or sometimes lay people writing them?
Well, they should be written by experts who have a background and understanding of, if you want, the scientific processes that go into constructing a profile like that. Because what we really need to make sure, because this profile is going to ultimately be used as part of the investigation, we need to make sure that the advice that we give is very much based on scientific evidence. So if you're saying you're looking for this type of person between the ages of 20 and 25, male, living within 1 mile of the crime scene, you need to already have the scientific backing that relates to the behaviors that actually occurred at the crime scene are indeed related to that kind of person. And you need to be basing that very much on an understanding of the scientific literature, rather than just an opinion, if you want, which has been the process very much in the past.
Are experts generally in agreement with the methodology being used? Are there flaws to how it's being done?
You know, the process has changed a great deal since probably about the early 1990s. In the beginning of profiling, the way that the process started was very much from an investigative point of view. So there were very experienced investigator and clinicians who were giving input based on their experiences with offenders, either as part of investigations or working with them within the clinical setting, prison setting, and so on. As the field developed and it became, if you want, more popular, there was a greater demand to make it absolutely scientific, so that when we gave an opinion, we could actually back it up with numbers. How that process has evolved, there's been a number of different ways, but probably I would say the most up-to-date one, the one that has really, if you want, provided the baselines and the methodology to do it, is what we call the field of investigative psychology, which is, I would say, the field that is most current and up to date in order to provide that methodology. There's of course some disagreements. There's always going to be disagreement between scientists, but that's healthy because what that does is challenge the methodology. And then because of that challenge, we're able to work on it to see how we can maybe work it and develop it in better ways.
When you talk about profiling, you talk a lot about the behavior variables that you are examining. But today, when people hear profiling, the word has become almost pejorative, and it's associated with, they think, racial profiling. They think about being scrutinized based on their ethnicity or religion. What do you make of that?
Well, offender profiling and racial profiling are two separate things. They just happen to use the word profiling, which essentially talks about identifying a specific type of person. Now, racial profiling talks about specific subgroups of people who are engaging in certain activities. Offender profiling focuses on the behaviors alone. We may make a link to the background of the offender that include things like cultural differences, maybe sometimes racial differences, but only really if they pertain to things to do with their culture that can help explain actions in a particular way. And so I think that there's been some misunderstanding about that, which makes sense because people are using the same word. But there's a lot of misunderstandings about profiling, including, for example, in the media, it's the whole idea that as psychologists, we can get inside the mind of someone and trying to understand their motivations and their intentions, which is, we can't even do that with people that we know. It's very difficult to do with people we've never even seen. And that's why we focus very much on the behaviors at the crime scenes, because these are objective, they're visual, and we can measure them.
You mentioned the media. How much exactly has the media contributed to this negative image of profiling?
I think that the way it's been portrayed in the media may have lent an understanding that profiling is easier than it actually is, and that is a straightforward process. So for example, that just purely based on some basic information, I could come up with a profile about who an offender is. But the reality is, as scientists, what we would do in order to provide that profile is we would look at all of the materials available to the police, including the crime scene report, the autopsy reports, any reports that have been made on the evidence, forensic evidence and so on, location, geography, photograph, the whole thing, and then do a thorough statistical analysis on what we find. So we're actually having to translate what we see into the numbers that we can use for all of that statistical analysis that can then help us understand what is going on, and that is a very lengthy process.
Experts in the field have said that profiling is as much an art as it is science. Your take on that?
I think that we've moved a long, long way from the early days when profiling was very much an art. And maybe still today we think of it as an art that is specific to an individual personality who might be able to deal with the crime scene, get inside the mind of someone, and it's based on how good someone is at doing that. I think where we are today is we've developed an understanding of that process on a much more scientific basis that we can now use to train both analysts, investigators and psychologists to use that themselves in that process rather than it being reliant on someone's personal experience. So I think we've come a long, long way, and hopefully we're going to go much further in the future.
Dr. Gabrielle Salfati, thank you for your expertise.
Thank you very much for having me.
When we come back, a pioneering immigrant producer on public television helps legitimize a fledgling art form.
To be a great dad is the most important job in a man's life, but it doesn't have to be hard. All it takes is a few minutes of your time, because the smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
You realize that 49 million Americans struggle with hunger? That's 1 out of every 6 Americans.
These people are around us every day. They're our friends, they're our coworkers, their kids go to school with our kids.
Sometimes we're not even aware that they're struggling. This problem is closer than you think. So is the solution.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
And finally from us tonight. Today, it's common to see video art exhibited in museums and galleries, but that wasn't always the case. In the 60s, video wasn't even considered art. Jaime Davidovich was an early pioneer of that art form, and he's never stopped experimenting and creating new works, not even after he became one of the first public access television producers in New York.
The Live show with Dr. Davidovich critiqued television and gave the alternative art scene a presence on cable television. We hear more about Davidovich in this report from Judith Escalona.
Now, do you find critics more receptive to your work than now you're the best artist?
No, that's actually the why I say that I'm the best artist, because the critics will not touch me with a 10-foot pole.
Jaime Davidovich defies definition. He is a video artist who paints and a television producer more interested in art than in ratings. Davidovich is a pioneer of public access cable television. He created an art show for TV unlike any other.
And was conceived with the idea of the cabaret Voltaire. They will show work that they will confront the audience, that they will question the audience, and sometimes they were very hostile to the audience.
The live show debuted on public access in 1979, hosted by Dr. Davidovich, Jaime Davidovich's TV persona.
TV addiction. I watch too much TV. What can I do for this?
But what can you do? I think that you have a problem of saturation.
It was the first show to feature the work of downtown artists in a format that was a cross between video art and the Ed Sullivan Show.
I don't know what you're doing.
Well, we're doing art.
Davidovich arrived in New York 16 years earlier when the alternative art scene was exploding on 2nd Avenue and south of Houston Street, the area now called Soho. Downtown artists were experimenting with new forms and challenging the status quo. Davidovich fit right in.
I believe that art has to have a political component, otherwise it's just decoration. In 1963, I decided to move to United States because the situation in Argentina was very stifled.
Downtown artists were also seeking alternatives to the galleries and museums. They wanted to deinstitutionalize art, making it accessible to a broader public. They took to the streets, displaying work on billboards, walls, and storefronts.
This is also similar conceptually in all the things that now the people are talking in Occupy Wall Street and Occupy the art world, because the 1% that controls the museums, the 1% that controls the art galleries, and the 1% controls what's being seen in television and what's not being seen.
In 1973, Davidovich was invited to participate in the prestigious Whitney Biennial, a survey of American contemporary art held every 2 years by the Whitney Museum.
After the Whitney, I stopped doing the tape process and concentrated more on video. And I became part of the video scene in New York City. Video fit perfectly into this kind of art outside the mainstream, because video, when we first invented, was never shown in art galleries or institutions, or was not even considered art.
The live show ended in 1984 after a 5-year run. Today, you can watch segments of it on YouTube.
YouTube is like public access and steroids.
Nearly 40 years and several accolades later, Jaime Davidovich is still a working video artist, recently exhibiting in Spain, Argentina, England, and the U.S. A New York solo show is scheduled for later this year. I'm Judith Escalona, Independent Sources.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Until the next time, be independent-minded.